HR, training, skills development, whatever it is, development work. We've got a list of acronyms, I'm sure. Today we're going to introduce a new one, IRM. So you'll all be talking about IRM for the near future, hopefully for the long future as well. So NBI and Harambee have been working, as Makana indicated, for many years to try and solve a problem. Right? And what is the nature of that problem? Well, the nature of the problem is that a large bulk of our young people that leave the education system every year get stuck. There's no meaningful pathways for them into the labour market. There's a variety of reasons why that happens. They come out with various educational backgrounds, and that's often seen as a proxy for whether they're employable or not. So if you have a matric, more likely to be employable, we perceive, right? There's a perception. So most young people will try and stick it out to matric, and then, you know, that's seen as a golden ticket. And we know that that's not a golden ticket, because only very few of them then get into higher education. So those that come out with matric form part of the masses that also get stuck. Those that drop out pre-matric are more likely to get stuck. So as the NBI and Harambee, our big task is to say, how do we unblock opportunities for that large number? Now, our target group there is the most marginalized, because those are the ones that are mostly likely to become part of your NEETs out there. The 6 million NEETs that we all refer to, they're all coming out of that pool, that bunch of young people who have very little opportunity, even if they do happen to get into a post-school institution, unless it's a university, which we know is limited, there are very few pathways available to them. So this is one of the problems we're trying to solve, right? We also know that there's about 32 billion rand, and it obviously increases, so you have to update it every year. It's probably more this year, because this was done at the end of last year, being spent on various mechanisms to try and support those young people to go on those pathways. So whether you talk about colleges, you talk about SETAs, you talk about all sorts of on-the-job training, you talk about public employment programs, public work programs, a range of things that are happening in the private and public space, the use of incentives through your ETIs, your employment tax incentives and the like, skills development levies, and all of these little bits and pieces all over the place, some bigger than others, trying to help these young people in this transition and failing effectively. Because this is not improving. Because the most marginalized of our young population are never getting access to the benefits of that 32 billion. And the 32 billion is ultimately only really benefiting a few. So that's the second part of the problem. So as we say, it's not addressing the mismatch between supply and demand. And this is the heart of where this initiative sits, as with other initiatives that we do within both Harambee and NBI. This is the conundrum that we try to resolve. And we're targeting those young people, the majority of which are your NEETs out there, right, who never get pushed to the front of the queue. So if there are jobs, they're unlikely to access them. So that's what we're here today to try and resolve. So this particularly focuses on technical pathways. So we know there's a myriad of pathways, and we have various sectors that we do, whether it's on the BPO sector, whether it's retail and hospitality, whether it's whatever it is. There's a range of sectors out there that we could be doing the same thing and are doing the same thing in. But our concern today is fundamentally about technical pathways, because obviously you build the economy on the back of technical skills. It's a critical part. And that could be related to IT, but there's a strong interface obviously between IT and your technical pathways invariably because of your Industry 4.0 and the fact that a lot of what we're doing in the technical space is very driven by new and emerging technologies. But the reality is that the technical pathways at the moment are fundamentally blocked for the majority of young people. And I'll talk to the numbers to try and illustrate the point. So what we're trying to do is say, how do we open up technical pathways for larger numbers of young people? Not who are going to be artisans. We have an obsession in the country about artisans. We had an obsession for many years. Our previous Minister of Education reinforced that obsession all the time. Year of the artisan, decade of the artisan, 35,000 artisans a year, whatever it is, and this is the foundation of everything we think about in technical skills. And we're not even talking about technicians, technologists, engineers, and the higher end skills. We're just talking about your intermediate skills. And to train one artisan, as Janet will read, we've been dealing with this conundrum for many years. How much does it cost to train one artisan? And depending on who you speak to, it can cost anything from $500,000 to up to $800,000 per artisan to train one artisan, depending on the trades, depending on the complexity of the trade, whatever it is. So even hitting the 35,000 that we, or 25,000, whatever we want, whatever number we're trying to hit, is very expensive. And there are only very few workplaces in our country that can actually do that. And it's going to be largely your large companies, your SOCs, and government departments. But it's invariably going to be only a small fraction of that big pool that's coming out of the education system. And it's most likely going to be those that have matric, maths and science, that the employers can really get a signal, this is the best candidate, because that's the perception. That's the best candidate for me. Matric, maths and science is the primary factor that we'll look at, and then some of the other things. So that's where we've concentrated all our efforts, and that's what's created this kind of blockage, because the pathways to that are not open for the majority of young people out there. And so we're trying to create a new zone of opportunity, some new occupational pathways that are there, they're just not obvious. We call it latent demand, which is just a fancy term. So I'm going to probably talk a lot of, ecosystem was another fancy term. We're going to talk fancy terms today, and you can, interpret them in how you will and forget about them or not. But the point is that we call it latent demand because the demand is there, but it's not obvious. And it's not obvious to the large majority of young people coming out of the system, and it's not obvious necessarily even to the employers, because they're not thinking about these opportunities as part of their contribution to job creation and whatever it is. They're just employing at random, in probably very expensive recruitment practices, and they're definitely not inclusive. So our focus is how do we make those hiring practices, those recruitment practices more efficient and more inclusive, so that more young people get access to those opportunities. But also, how do we make sure that the employer is getting the right kind of candidate for that position? So we make it more efficient and effective for the employer as well on the demand side. So we want to create this enabling mechanism to match the supply and demand, and this is the core of the work that we do. This is, as I said, the core of the problem we're trying to solve. We also want to see how we get the TVET system to be more responsive, which is not to say that we're going to try and fix it all, because we know that it's a very challenging environment. Those of you who have engaged with TVET colleges in one or another, we've been engaging with TVET colleges for 20 years, and I've got the grey hairs to prove it. But the reality is that they are a very important public resource. They attract a large amount of, up to 10 billion of that 32 billion goes into the TVET colleges, including your NSFAS and other sorts of things. So there's a big funded pool of candidates out there who have nowhere to go, right? But beyond that, we don't limit ourselves only to TVET colleges. So we see this as an ecosystem which has more than one player, but the TVET colleges are important. So, and I'll talk to how we're going to engage with them to try and address this. But ultimately, as we've indicated, we need to be able to sustain whatever work we do. So the funding, that 32 billion and more, because it is increasing and there's more from other sources coming in. We now have the YES initiative and other sorts of things coming in to add to that. How do we make sure that that funding enables us to create and sustain these pathways indefinitely? So we have intermediate ways of funding it, but we've got to find, which means we have to shift some of the funding in that ecosystem. And we'll talk to you about how we do that. So this is what we call our zone of opportunity, another fancy term. Our IRM zone of opportunity, right? Which is about entry points that we can open up, right? And we're going to think about it quite widely. So when you see the range of things we're talking about, you'll see that it's quite an open space. We're not trying to limit it, because at the moment the artisan route forces us to think like this. We're trying to open it up and look at it more broadly and look at it more innovatively, and not have a one-size-fits-all, and have a very cost-effective model, because it'll be different in terms of getting into a position in a retail environment, this kind of a position in a retail environment versus getting into a manufacturing environment versus construction or whatever it is. There's no one-size-fits-all, but we've got to agree on what are the kind of minimum criteria that we're trying to achieve. So our engagement, and my colleague Sylvester spends a lot of time talking to companies. Like, that's his thing. He talks to companies every day and tries to bring them on board, tries to, bring them into our fold in terms of trying to help us solve this problem. And our engagement suggests that that this zone of opportunity exists. We can't quantify it completely because it's difficult to quantify. The data is not that clear. If you go onto any of the online recruitment sites and you type in installation, repair and maintenance, you will see a range of jobs pop up. Some of them require more experience than others, whether it's in security, whether it's in telecommunications and fiber optics, whether it's wherever it is, construction, whether it's domestic, industrial. There's a whole range of opportunities that we want to exploit in this space over here, right? Which requires a range of role players. And that's why we've invited you today, to help us to do this. So it's about improving the effectiveness of the pathways and blocking the pathways for those that are locked out of the labour market, and making sure that those pathways are managed efficiently and effectively. So it can't just be random, it's got to be done properly. So these are the kinds of roles that we're looking at. And they might not be comprehensive, there might be a role. These are the kinds of roles that we call IRM roles. And as you can see, they're quite varied. And it's not about being an electrician, and it's not about being a plumber, and it's not about being a mechanic, necessarily. It's about roles that sit under that qualified plumber, under that qualified electrician, and are there to basically do the work. So every time you call a plumber to your house to come and do repairs, the plumber doesn't actually do the work much of the time. It's the people that he employs that does it, or she employs that does all the work. These people get no recognition. Right? They've learnt on the job. They haven't even necessarily been trained. They're there, and they work for this SME for many years, and they build up skills, and some of them do more sophisticated jobs than others. But invariably, the plumber has to sign off on the job, or the electrician, or whatever, because otherwise, and you hope that that plumber is qualified and can sign off on the job in a responsible way. But the range of roles that sit there underneath that sphere is the range of roles we're trying to exploit for this initiative. And it can operate across a range of work contexts. As you see, it's quite varied. And if you think about any of your workspaces, anyone in any of your workspaces or in your domestic environment, these are the roles you need. These are the technical roles that you need to make that environment work. So the air conditioning breaks down, you need cables, network cables or fiber optic cables run, you need you need plumbing repairs, you need electrical repairs, you need construction because you've got to move offices and whatever it is, drywalling and whatever. There's a range of roles in any work context that require these kinds of skills. When you call out a security service to come and fix the alarm system at your house, they send out technicians, right? They call them technicians. We call them IRM technicians or IRM workers or IRM roles, whatever we want to call it. But these are the guys that we're targeting. And as I say, it's about installation, repair and maintenance of machinery, equipment and infrastructure in these sorts of work settings. So it's quite varied. It's not boxed. It's not fixed. And fundamentally, it's not about what is the qualification, right? That's not our primary purpose. Yes, we need to recognize the skills, and we'll talk about that these young people are acquiring during this process. But fundamentally, it's what is the job that they can do at the end of it that's going to make them employable. Okay. So it's out of the box thinking. So what are the elements of what we're trying to do? One is that we've got to catalyze the demand. So this is a big part of what we do collectively as NBI and Harambee. We catalyze demand. We work with employers, independently, individually, or at a sector level, different platforms, work with employers to try and catalyze that latent demand. And we've done it across a range of sectors. You know, Harambee's done it in BPO, in retail, in hospitality, in the, you know, a range of different environments. And that's, so that's a big part of what we do, is work on the demand side. Because without demand, as Makana emphasized earlier, this whole thing falls flat. Right? We have to define what are the workplace requirements. What are we trying to get them to be able to do while they're in the workplace during the course of the thing, and we'll talk about the model. What is the nature of the curriculum that we're trying to teach them to prepare them for those workplace environments? So, you know, in traditional terms, Harambee would run a program where we would first understand those workplace requirements, and we would select candidates that meet those workplace requirements, and we would bridge those candidates to prepare them for those workplace requirements. This is an extension of that, because now what we're trying to bridge them is not just work readiness, which is what has been our bread and butter for the last few years, but it's also practical skills. What are the practical skills that they need? I'm going to come to that. So it's about integrated theoretical work readiness and practical skills. It's about blended learning, because we want to be able to make learning exciting and interesting for young people, engage them in learning, because the fundamental problem, they're coming out of a poor education system. They're going to TVET colleges, that's just an extension of the poor schooling system. And learning is not interesting and learning is not exciting, which is part of why they drop out or fail or whatever it is. So we want to turn that around. So we make learning more accessible, more interesting, more dynamic, more interactive. And it's got to be agile. As I said, it can't be a one-size-fits-all. So we've got to get the supply side to be able to engage with the demand side. And the demand side must say to the supply side, this is what we need, and the supply side must be able to meet them, which requires agility on the supply side. So this is the broad picture. So in terms of the demand management and funding of this thing, we have Harambee playing the core role in terms of the general IRM ecosystem, as we call it, with NBI specifically focusing on the green skills aspects of it. But we do it collectively, and we do all of these things collectively. So we have government partners, we have social investment partners, we have employer partners. We're signing up more and more employer partners. We have some early adopters. We're hoping we're going to sign up a few today. But even in principle. But I think the point is that we've got to grow this social compact over here. So we work with government. We work with the Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation in the Presidency. We work with the Department of Higher Education and Training. We work with DTI. We work with others. There are other core line departments that are responsible for supporting youth in one way or another, whether it's for jobs, for training, or for enterprise. We have social investment partners, including the likes of the Jobs Fund and others, even donors, right? And so we crowd in as much funding as we can from different sources and different ways that funding works. But ultimately, that funding is dependent on us being able to convert that opportunity to a job. So Harambee and NBI don't count success on the basis of whether we placed them for an internship. That for us is not success. It's nice, it's great. Success is how many of those internships convert into jobs. The job is the success. And whatever form that job might take, it might also be an enterprise. Yes, if they get into apprenticeship or learnership, that's also one way to look at it, and it's great. But ultimately, it's got to convert to a job. Or on our dashboard, we don't consider it a success. Okay. And then we have a model design and development, and we've got a reference group where we've got employers and training providers and some of our partners designing this whole thing and running this whole thing. But at the bottom here is where it gets the most messy, I suppose, is how we deliver on it. So we have a network of operators, both public and private, right? We have our TVET colleges that we're working with. And the NBI plays a particular role in making sure that the TVET colleges are able to deliver. So from the NBI side, there's huge pressure to make colleges work for this. Okay? But we also work with a network of private training providers. So we work with the likes of the Artisan Training Institute, we work with the Resolution Circle, we work with and a range of others. We work through the National Tooling Initiative as a pipeline for our candidates who want to go into advanced apprenticeships. So there's a range, there's a whole network. So we're not limiting it only to our public sector. We're saying if we've got willing partners in the private space who share the same ideals, so they're not just chasing profit, but they also really want to work with unemployed youth and get them into jobs, then we will work with them. And we found some good willing partners, and we're going to be sourcing more as we move nationally. But we do have a particular intent on getting TVET colleges to play a critical role in this, because there's a whole lot of funding in there that needs to be properly applied and used. So the model works very simply like this. At the moment, this is what's happening. We've got matrics and pre-matrics. They go through a very limited selection and matching up here. They go into this TVET engineering space. Lots of them fail. Lots of them drop out. A lot succeed. So just here you've got over 100,000, about 115,000 give or take, not maybe less, whatever it is, let's call it 100,000 that are sitting there and nowhere to go. Right? So they've got an engineering part qualification, now we call them part qualifications, or they've got an NCV, which is a full qualification, or they've come out of a technical high school. And they've got an engineering background of some sort. Only very few of them are going to get into trades. As per the minister's latest budget speech, 21,000, which is boasting, 21,000. I think that's great, but it doesn't solve the problem. And the large majority of them are going straight from here, skipping that and going straight into here. So these guys over here don't even benefit. They become part of your needs, right? But they've gone through a funded system, a 10 billion rand funded system, and there is no outlet for them or entry point into the labour market. So they're going to go and become waiters or whatever. They're not going to become artisans for sure, and they're not even going to get into technical opportunities in the labour market. So we've got to unblock this, because this is what's restricting us, this is what's frustrating us as if we work in this space. So for these guys, right here, we've got to say, what can we do to support those guys that are already there? That's our first protocol, and we're already starting to do that. So with our private training provider partners, we're sourcing candidates from this pool based on the demand that we've identified with some of our employer partners for placement into on-the-job training and the like, even into apprenticeships, even into jobs, in a variety of different roles. We are taking these candidates, we're putting them through a selection and matching process, which they should have had up front, but now we're doing it after, against the requirements that we've identified over here on the demand side, and we're bridging what they don't have. And what they don't have is they don't have practical skills and they don't have work readiness. And that's what we're doing over here. So we're bridging them, we're preparing them, and then we get the employers to select the candidates that best suit their requirements. And we've got some early adopters that are working with us on that, in the insurance industry and in the property industry, and I'll talk a bit about that. We have employers who have said, no, we're keen to be involved, and we want to use this opportunity to place young people and for a year-long process, and we'll claim them as part of the Youth Employment Service or whatever it is. We will find ways to build them into our skills development, find ways, so creative ways of using that as an opportunity in their supply chains to place young people and give them work experience for 12 months on the job training. So we've already identified some of those, and we're now testing. So I'll talk later, but we have about 100 candidates already being trained as we speak at Artisan Training Institute and Resolution Circle, and they will be going into workplaces starting in October for a year. So we're up and running. Some are in motor, some are in non-motor, construction, plumbing, and others, depending on what the demand is, property maintenance, etc. But the bigger challenge, which we will start to tackle from next year, is how to fix the pipeline. Yeah. So that when they come into the college in the first instance, they get better selected and matched against the demand, right? So that once they've gone through their engineering theory, and we will work with the colleges as well, and that's part of the NBI mandate, is to strengthen some of this so that we can get better throughput here as well. So once they've gone through their engineering theory, which is fully funded by the state, by our tax money, effectively, once we've gone through that, right, then we've already earmarked them as good candidates for these opportunities. And we will then put them through this. Now, all of this eventually will be delivered through the TVET colleges. And we've earmarked specific TVET colleges that we're working with to build their capacity to do that. Not exclusively. We're still going to work with our private networks of providers. But we want to make sure that gradually we can also bring the TVET system, because the funding is all there. So that's where we need to shift the funding. We need to say to DHET and Treasury, don't just put all the money in here, because that's not solving the problem. What we need is the money to do this, the pipeline, the pathways. And that's what we will do with them. Now, when we do selection and matching, we do it against a range of criteria. One is geography. It's a big one. They've got to be near the workplace. Because we know that of our candidates, if they have to pay too much for transport, they're not going to stay. So we put a very big primacy on geography, and our pathway management system that we built with the GPS, built-in GPS type of technology, enables us to match the opportunities as carefully as possible in terms of geography. The second one is the fit. So we will very deliberately fit candidates to the workplace requirements. And Harambee has built the capability to do that over the last 8 years very effectively. Right? And the last thing is we have a deliberate focus on needs. So when we say needs, we're talking about your quintile 1 to 3 population, young population, who live below a particular social means, might or might not have a matric, and have never had a job, and are never likely to get a job. So we set the criteria quite rigidly around that, but there might be some flexibility, like some employers will demand a matric, so we won't fight with them, but we'll change their mind eventually. Because we've been able to show proxies through looking at learning potential by saying maths is not an indication of learning potential, actually. If you have matric maths, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the potential to succeed. But we can show that learning potential actually trumps maths in certain instances. So we can bridge the maths if you have learning potential. Okay. So we have a pilot, as I said, and we're doing it at the moment. So I've spoken through that, and a second cohort will start in October of 120. And we're still getting the workplaces on board too. So we won't train them unless we have demand. Okay? We need to go door to door to each employer and sell it and make it work so that we bring as many employers on board as possible. Even if you're only going to take 5 candidates or 3 candidates, it's great. We will work with whatever we can. And there's the more employers we get. So I mean, Harambee has a network of about 450 employers. NBI has a huge membership base, as you saw, all the different logos. So between these two organizations, we want to bring all of those employers into this as much as possible, and whatever we can do. And then we've started building some sector level initiatives. So in the green skills arena, particularly in the plumbing, solar, water, heating, and photovoltaic industry, we're building a kind of a sector level initiative, and we're working with the Institute of Plumbing and GIZ. I can say that, hey? to build the pipeline for plumbing, for the plumbing industry, and to build a new, which is what we're trying to do at a sectoral level, is build a new designation. What are these people? Give them some form of title, which is not a restrictive title, but enables us to define who they are. So in the case of the plumbing industry, at the moment, you have a plumber and nothing else below that, really. So they're working with us to design a pathway around a plumbing technician. And we want to do that in electrical and in motor body repair and in automotive and all sorts of things. What are these new pathways that we can open? Not driven by qualifications primarily, but driven by occupations. But giving it recognition so that when you come out, you know what that person can do. There's a competence element to it. Eventually, we'll get it credentialed. It's a fancy word, another fancy word. Credentialed, recognized, some form of designation. Similarly, in automotive, both on the manufacturing and the retail side, particularly in the motor body repair, we see there's a lot of potential there. Working through the insurance companies, because there's big challenges in terms of motor body repair in that industry. And then in property, the property, housing and hotel maintenance arena. And that we see as a big area. So we're working with the Joburg Inner City Partnership to build micro enterprises around building maintenance. All these buildings in town, for example, that need maintaining. So it works with the big property companies to try and open up those opportunities for these candidates to become part of the pool that gets access to those maintenance contracts or works for an SME who has a maintenance contract. All right, so that's just some of the ideas. And then just to talk about how we're going to roll it out. So as for this year, we plan the 200, 220, somewhere around there. Is our target between now and December. We've started to establish our partnerships, particularly in Gauteng, and now we're looking in Western Cape and East London. We've set up a reference group, as I indicated. We've started to test the curriculum, and we've started to build a model of what are we going to do with the colleges to get them geared up to do this. Next year, we tend to, when I say next year, so by the end of this financial year, which is June 2019, we will have placed 1,000, sorry. We don't talk train, placed 1,000, which means we train more than 1,000, right? The following financial year, we aim to place 2,800 across these various sectors that I've been referring to, and build what we're calling a credentials or signal framework. So we want employers to know that once a candidate comes out of this thing and they come to you with whatever it is that indicates that you can trust that candidate meets the kind of standards that you require for these sort of roles. So we're building that framework, and we do that at a sector level, so it's employer-driven by employer organizations. Finally, in the third financial year, 3,700 trained and placed in multiple sectors, and we're scaling up. These are targets. We hope to exceed them. So they're just targets. And the way that we hope to do it is we've kind of split it regionally. But again, these are not fixed in stone. But by the end of this 3-year period, we will have placed 7,500 candidates into IRM roles, at least. If we exceed that, it'll be great. And remember, this is just a subset of the bigger pool of candidates that Harambee is trying to place across the economy. So, I don't know if it looks like a small number or a big number. We hope to exceed it.
Apparently the number is small.
Huh?
Apparently the number is small.
Apparently the number is small.
Cancelled by 10.
Okay, great. We'll do it. As long as we've got demand. So what is the benefit for the employers? Obviously about contributing to these entry pathways and opportunities for youth in these technical fields. Employer-led partnership to develop a new credentialing recognition framework for these occupations. And the private sector contribution to strengthening the efficiency and quality of the TVET system, which is not your responsibility, it's our responsibility, but you partners in it. So we will do the hard work. You just need to be there to receive the candidates, right? And engage with these candidates. And we're hoping that we're going to give you the right candidates. Well, in fact, we put our neck on it, because that's the reputation we put on the line between Harambee and NBI, is that we're going to give you the right candidates. And we live and die by that reputation. If we didn't have that reputation, neither organization would exist. Okay, so at a company level, it's obviously about building your skills pipeline for these roles. It's about enhancing your investment in skills development, and it's about optimizing opportunities in your supply chain. Right. And we can talk, I don't want to go into too much of the detail around how that operates, but we can talk more and more about how we've done that very practically with some of our employer partners, this particular last one. Because that enables us to access the SME environment on a larger scale, so that it's not all the burden is put on the larger industries to try and create these opportunities. We can work with a range of SMEs and open up those opportunities. And then, so what do we want you to think about now when we have our discussion? Is this viable? We think it's viable. In fact, we're convinced it's viable, and we've been working hard to build the viability, build the business case, right? And obviously you can't really demonstrate the business case until you've actually implemented. So you know, we've started down the road, but we are confident, based on the collective experience and intelligence that we know about the skills system, the TVET system, in the employers that we're working with in the technical space, we think this is a viable concept, right? And we think that everyone can benefit from it, most particularly young people. The scope of demand and opportunities. So just thinking a little bit in terms of your own roles in that ecosystem. What is the scope of demand and opportunities that you can visualize, that you can imagine, right, in the space that you work in? What is the scope for employers to sign up IRM candidates as part of their skills development, their ESD, their YES commitments, whatever incentives we can use out there, ETI and all sorts of things, right? Those of you who are signing up for YES, I won't ask you to put your hands up. But, you know, this is part of that initiative. But how you optimize these incentives on the demand side. And then the development of micro enterprises. Very practically, how do we develop viable micro enterprises with these kind of technical skills into these SME environments? Thanks.
Thank you.